If you have joined our program before, you'll know that this is a joint effort between CAHF's Disaster Preparedness Program and the Los Angeles County Department of Health Services. And so this web series, we hear about updates about the healthcare coalitions that go on in LA County. And then we talk about some different topics that are relevant to skilled nursing providers, ICFs, IEDs, long-term care providers in LA County specifically. So we'll go ahead and get started here. So we have here myself, Rich, and Chris. And if you've watched our videos before, you'll have seen these slides before. These are some acronyms that you'll run across. This is kind of the situation that we're looking at as far as disaster preparedness goes in LA County. There's dozens and dozens and dozens of skilled nursing facilities in LA County. And when a disaster happens, it's kind of up to us to do patient transfers and really reach out to LA County and get the resources that you need. And so this is kind of the motivation behind this web series, to get that information to you in a format that is accessible to you and your busy schedules. So if you have not joined us before, we have healthcare coalitions in LA County that are centered around what's known as a disaster resource center. These are large hospitals that have volunteered to kind of host these healthcare coalition meetings. And so typically a county has one healthcare coalition. LA County has these 10 regional coalitions. So if you haven't already, you'll want to take a look at our webpage, take a look at this map that you see here, and find the DRC that is closest to you, and give their coordinator an email, put yourself on their radar, and so when exercises come around, you have partners to play with in order to satisfy these new regulations that CMS has released for emergency preparedness. This is just a little flow chart of how the information is distributed, where it's coming from. This is another photo of a disaster resource center. And so with that, that's kind of a synopsis of our program. That should get you up to speed if this is your first time with us. And with that, I will turn the mic over to Rich Witerinsky. He is our consultant that attends all of these disaster resource center meetings and then brings back that information to us, and we pass it along to all of you. Rich, do you want to tell us about the Exercise Evaluation Conference?
Yeah, the Exercise Evaluation Conference was held, I believe, on the 12th of December in Santa Fe Springs. And there was, I would imagine, 70 to 80 people there, primarily from acute care hospitals. There was 2 other nursing homes that were there besides myself. So the vast majority were acute care hospitals, the DRCs. But we had a real good showing, interestingly enough, from the dialysis units, who are getting their act together, as we are as well. The one major takeaway from the after the exercise, recoupment there, for lack of another word, is that it's about communication. And they say that there was and there is problems with communication. They talked about the issues of holding drills, and they say the drills cannot be perfect, and they don't expect anybody to have a perfect drill. They expect you to hold drills and then have after the drill conference that CMS requires, by the way, that you document and you put it into your folder for them when they come and visit you. And this after drill kind of like get together, as I said, shouldn't be perfect, but you should all learn from it and be real and be critical of what can be done. So for instance, if communication within the building is difficult, then you might want to buy walkie-talkies. That's just one suggestion. But that was the gist, in my opinion, of what the after drill event was in Santa Fe Springs.
Rich, I think it's called after action report is the most common
Right.
term I see, but um, did they talk at all about ReadyNet for the exercise, communicating with ReadyNet?
Well, ReadyNet is always brought up because it is the mode that long-term care facilities can communicate with the state, with other institutions. So they did bring it up, as you know, Courtney, and we are able to get those things for free, ReadyNet setups, and so it's very, very important for everyone in the 364 nursing homes in LA County to be connected to ReadyNet. Gives you an update in terms of what's occurring, and then it enables you to determine if beds are needed. If you have empty beds, you can broadcast that on ReadyNet, and they might be able to send you patients during a disaster. So it's very, very helpful. Hospitals use a different system. Chris, what's the hospital system?
It's the same thing. It's ReadyNet, but they just have a different. They have different access, different, more system in play because they have HabBed.
Okay.
That's about it. It's the same program. It's just access.
Got it.
And so for LA County's Exercise Evaluation Conference, on their website, they have several documents ready for participants to use in the evaluation of your exercise. On the screen here, we have a couple photos. That first one there on top, that is LA County's format for sending in your improvement plan, your after action report. And so this is a very brief format here, which they use to kind of collate data of how everyone did. And you can also do your own format. Whatever, if you want to work with LA County, definitely use their documents, and I will put a link to their webpage when we post this video on YouTube, so you can refer back to that, because they continuously update that page as well.
And Courtney, these forms are all on the CAHF website, right?
So CAHF, we have some templates for after action reports, and then LA County, they have these ones here that they post on their website, and sometimes they like to do the format a little differently because they're using ReadyNet or because they're using some kind of way to collect data or trends of how these exercises are going. So if you want to play with LA County, refer to their webpage where I got these documents here. And then in the future, if you are going to do a tabletop exercise, you can always go to our website as well. We have a ton of different templates, and we collect them from all sorts of different sources. So thanks, Rich.
So you don't have to invent the wheel, in other words.
Exactly. Yep. That's what I'm here for. So to bring that stuff to you. So let's see. So having these documents is how you would prove to a surveyor that you participated in the exercise. They'll want to see your areas of improvement, and those areas of improvement will kind of guide your training and your updates to your emergency operations plan for the coming year, right up until your next exercise. And so when you see us talk about updating your plan every year, or these annual updates to your hazard vulnerability assessment, which we'll talk about a little bit later, it's because you're getting this new information as you're testing your plan, and you're using these exercises to improve your program overall. So like Rich was saying earlier, there's no such thing as a bad drill. There's no such thing as a perfect drill, because it's a learning tool. It's a learning experience for you and your staff.
And it's also important to note that you can take responsibility, you can take credit, that's the word I'm looking for, if you have things occur. So for instance, I was at a DRC meeting this morning, and there was an acute care hospital there that said that the power company was going to be shutting down electricity because they're going to be replacing a pole. And so they immediately went out and rented another generator, and on and on and on. And the fellow there said, yes, we will be taking this and crediting ourselves as this being an exercise, a drill. And then he also indicated that they would be having a post-drill assessment done as well. And they'll plop it into their notebook, and when CMS comes by or the surveyors, they have it, and they can show them what they did.
Yeah, that's a great point, Rich. Anything that interrupts your normal operations, if you know how to frame it so that you're testing your staff's response, and then you know how to write it up with an after action report and an improvement plan, you can use smaller incidents like that that are, we call them facility specific exercises, is the lingo you would want to use when you talk to a surveyor or to another emergency management person. Say if you attended a DRC meeting or you attended some sort of training. Um, and I think we have one more slide here for December for Rich to give us an update about. A lot of the DRCs, they used that December 12th meeting as their meeting for December. So we only have one other meeting update here. Rich, do you want to tell us how this one went?
Oh, which one was that specifically, Courtney? I'm sorry.
So I have it up on the screen here. Pomona Valley Medical Center. Is that showing up for you?
Yeah, it's showing up on mine. Yeah, Steve over there is a very experienced person who is, director of the disaster preparedness, and came down to, well, he just went over stuff that's going to be happening. And one of the things that's really exciting in terms of him is he has contacted the Pomona Fairplex, and they're going to be having a drill there that's going to be encompassing perhaps 80 to 100 people. And as some type of a terrorist drill there. So I asked, because I always ask, how can we incorporate our nursing homes into that type of a disaster drill? And what Steve suggested was, again, you could do an active shooter, or you could make some type of ready net contact with the organization to be able to say we have beds available or something of this nature. But the fact that this is being done on such a large scale just shows the importance of the necessity of putting together drills and effective drills. It's going to be real interesting to see the after terms of the report on this.
And Rich, you said that the hospital disaster management training is going to be occurring in March as well. You've been to that, haven't you? What's that like?
No, I haven't been to that, to be honest with you.
Okay. Well, they said that SNFs are welcome and that Steve Swerbakken would be willing to cover the registration fee or credit it to the DRC, you said?
Yes, correct. He said, I think the cost is $200 and he'd be willing to cover the cost. So it's a matter of contacting him specifically or us to act as run interference so that whoever would like to do it would be eligible to participate.
Yeah, that's really cool. That sounds like a great opportunity.
Courtney, this is Karen. I did go to that about a year and a half ago, and it's extraordinary, the experience you get. And of course, it's the same people generally that came to the DRC meeting. I think Jeff Kilby was in the room with me also, but I'm just kind of weighing in to encourage people that it's an incredible opportunity to be exposed to some procedures and exercises that you just wouldn't normally be exposed to. And even though it's not designed for skilled nursing facilities specifically, there's a lot of takeaways that you get from the experience that you can incorporate into your EOP.
Thanks, Karen. And for everyone listening, that's Karen Witterinsky. She is CAHF's Los Angeles consultant, and she works with us when we're attending disaster coalition advisory coalitions. Karen is also a really great resource for anything disaster preparedness related. And let's see. So if you attended the evaluation conference and you've filled out your forms, you've turned them back in, what is next for your emergency preparedness program? Now that it's the new year, we wrapped up the statewide exercise, you've got kind of a list of to-dos after your exercise evaluation. And so sort of the next thing is to go back to your plan and your hazard vulnerability assessment and make some updates. You learned some more about how your staff would operate during pressure, during an emergency, and maybe your priorities have changed. So on the screen right now, we've kind of got a flow chart, and that kind of shows you where we're at right now. And you can see how everything you do kind of cycles back and you're just continually testing yourself. And so go ahead.
Excuse me for interrupting, but this morning what they were talking about was at Presbyterian Hospital was they asked, had the people there that participated today completed their goals for last year? And then what they were talking about was what new goals people would have. And I would suggest that the same should go for each nursing home, that they should set goals. For instance, how many drills they're going to be having. One thing that comes to mind, and it was discussed there, but it wasn't discussed within the context of long-term care, but one of the things that might be considered in terms of a discussion is what kind of financial allocations, what kind of budgetary allocations would be made in regards to issues associated with disasters. So is it a matter of buying some type of device, a radio, a crank radio, a solar radio, or something of this nature? So that might be something that is projected this year as a goal. And again, drills. One of the things that was rather creative was the fact that one facility uses a monthly disaster question that they put on the 24-hour report. So it could be on the first Monday of the month, they ask the staff. And the reason I want to accentuate that is because, we have a variety of educational levels of people in our skilled nursing facilities. And it is very, let's say, difficult for some staff to talk about what the plan is, and they should know the plan. So it's important that the plan be reviewed with your staff, and then if a person doesn't know the answer, then what they can do is they can also say that they're going to be speaking with their supervisor about that. But they should have a general idea of what the plan is in their facility, their EOP, their emergency operations plan.
Rich, you're exactly right. And not to get too far off topic here, but we are starting to see some early reports back from survey, and it really does come down to being able to articulate your plan to the surveyor. And that means, not just handing them a binder, but being able to kind of tell them from start to finish, because you've been exercising it or doing drills with your staff, what that would look like in your building. And so I just want to underline the importance of that, because it's going to be just a recurring thing as people start to get surveyed more and more to the EP rule here. And so doing the hazard vulnerability assessment is really kind of the underlying, it's the bottom layer of everything in your emergency preparedness program. It's what your emergency operations plan is based on. It's what your policies and procedures are based on. And ultimately, it's what your exercises are based on, because it's, when you really just kind of talk about it, common sense, my number one threat is earthquake. That's what I will exercise on, unless you've identified something else or you're doing multiple drills. So. And one other thing, when Rich talks about doing drills, these are separate from your regular fire drills. These are a step above. These are tabletop exercises and higher. So just that needs to be a distinction that's made when you're making your drill schedule or your training schedule. A lot of people are trying to double up. And if you get a surveyor that's going to look really closely and really scrutinize your plan, those are supposed to be separate things. So just kind of hopping back to our slide here, we already talked about our first point there, and we're going to show you what an HVA looks like. An HVA, it's basically a risk assessment, and you'll again want to know your top hazards for talking to a surveyor and being able to articulate what your plan is. So
Courtney, let me say this. On page 18, there is a probability, it's an HVA there in terms of how you develop your scores. And one of the things that you see if you scroll down, natural events, so hurricane, tornadoes, severe thunderstorms, and the very last one in the categories is dam failure. And that's interesting that that's there, because up in Northern California, you've had that problem with the dam. Down here, don't know if that's going to be such an issue. But
Right.
Under that, man-made events, and the first one is elopement.
Yeah.
And so if you're a behavioral unit, I've heard this from at one of the DRC meetings, is if you're at a behavioral unit that one of your what's called, and if sometimes people, if you have a locked facility, sometimes people get away, they elope, then you would have to put that down. Another thing that was brought up was one of the acute care settings that was at a meeting last week talked about the fact that they have a behavioral unit, and the life safety people, these surveyors in essence, they were, let's say, critical of their plan because it did not include ligature risks. And what that means is that the possibility of a person unfortunately taking their own life by hanging themselves.
Right.
And so, when you are in a specialized unit, if you have ventilators, you have to, certainly the first issue might be earthquake. But beyond that, you've got to be able to then do something to evacuate these people. And then we get into the issue of MOUs. Memorandums of understandings with other facilities that have like residents, and that has to be in the plan as well.
And
because
I'll have to stop you right there, because you're bringing up so many great points. I just don't want to get too ahead of ourselves here, because you made a really great distinction between there are natural hazards that we're going to review, and then there's man-made hazards. So it does come back to like knowing your own residents and knowing what they are at risk for.
Correct.
And then also, memorandums of understanding. We're going to talk about that at the end. If you are listening and you are not sure what a memorandum of understanding is, or if you have not seen one before, you can take the opportunity right now. You can check under handouts for this webinar, and we have a sample MOU there. If you want to review that before our next webinar, that's when we're going to be talking about that. And if you're interested in creating an MOU, you can give me an email, and we'll just start collecting names of interested people, because we're going to have to match up people with the correct kinds of unique needs, like vent patients or behavioral health units, et cetera, et cetera. But just back to the slide here, I just wanted to wrap up the DRC updates, and then Rich and I, we're going to dive into the HVA process. So the dates you see here, those are all of the meetings where you can go to your nearest disaster resource center and bring your hazard vulnerability assessment if you've done one, or bring the one that we're going to talk about today with you, and you'll get to see you kind of get to see everybody else's cards when you go to this meeting. And a lot of people, they share notes. If you're in the same neighborhood, you're going to have the same risks. And so it's a good way, it's a good time to get plugged into your healthcare coalition. And you absolutely want to do this, attending these particular coalition meeting, because one of the things that we're seeing when people report back to us about their surveys is that there isn't enough documentation of collaborating with your local response authorities. And we talked a lot about that in our previous webinars with ReadyNet and working with LA County for the statewide medical health exercise in November. And so this is your next opportunity to really check off some boxes for your emergency preparedness program when you are in your survey window, or just you need to update your plan after your survey or your last exercise. Okay, Rich, so again, we use these updates, and we use the things that we learn from the exercises to kind of prepare your training program coming up. And then, oops, that was strange. Here is kind of a graph of something we talked about earlier, how the hazard vulnerability assessment kind of sets up the rest of your emergency preparedness program. And so when you go to start identifying your risks or your hazards in your area, this is a really great website on Cal OES's website. You can just type in your address and it will show you flood maps. It'll show you if you're in like a tsunami warning area. It's got a bunch of different filters for different natural hazards. And then once you go to your HVA meeting at your local disaster resource center, that will help you identify any more hazards on the community level that you need to be aware of. Maybe your county has identified certain areas that are more prone to, well, I don't think that anybody that was affected by the mudslides really wanted to evacuate. And so it's just staying on top of any new updates in your community. And then there are a few different types of hazard vulnerability assessments. We're going to be working with this top one here, the black and white one. And you can find these on our website. And then I don't think I put it as a handout, so I will email this out to the attendees and put it on YouTube. And we'll take another look at how to gather information about your own facility after you've researched your community's hazards. So once you have a good idea of your natural hazards, you'll want to start looking at your own building, and you'll want to kind of gather the different leaders in your building, maybe your maintenance director, your director of nursing, your staff development director, kind of all the key players that you would need when you're responding to an emergency, and get their opinions. Ask them what, kind of like from a business continuity standpoint, what functions could they still do if they were affected by a certain hazard, maybe some of the top 3 hazards that you've identified, and get their feedback, and then you can plug that into your notes when you go to fill out the chart, and we'll go more into detail on that.
Courtney, I'm going to suggest that the nursing homes also contact the city in which they reside. And the reason I say that is because the cities have developed their own HVA, which, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel again.
Right.
And by the way, joining the city would enable you to start meeting the people that you're going to have to count on in the event of a disaster. So they could be the mayor, the city planner, or whatever, but at the same time, just calling up and say, hey, I'm a nursing home, I'm in your area. Can you come down and take a look at my building, and may I join your committee? Simple as that.
Right. If your city has an Office of Emergency Services, that would be a great place to start.
Right.
Yeah. And so here is the chart that Rich was referring to earlier. So we already talked about how the different hazards are broken out into natural events and man-made events. And so we have some particular hazards on here that may apply and may not apply. So if you are in California, it's not as likely that you'd be affected by a snowfall, blizzard, or ice storm. So you would give yourself a 0 on that. And we're going to kind of walk you through how to fill this out. So let's use earthquake as an example. So on those top rows there where it says probability, risk, and preparedness, we're going to look at the column for probability. And it says 3, 2, and 1. So if you know that you are in an earthquake zone, like most of LA County, then you would want to mark earthquake as the highest probability. And then for risk, if you're near a fault line, you know that it's not going to be just a small earthquake. It's possibly going to cause structural damage, damage to power lines, water lines, sewage lines. And so you would give that the highest risk there, which would be life-threatening. And then in the next column for preparedness, 3, 2, and 1. So a 3 equals
poor preparedness, because the way this chart works is it multiplies all of these numbers together and gives you a score. So we'll go ahead and give ourselves a 3, because say we have not done any training on earthquakes at all, and we're starting from scratch here. And so then we will multiply those 3 together to get our hazard score, which for earthquakes would be 45. And so once you've done this with all of the hazards that you've identified affect your area, so not blizzard or ice storm or hurricane, you could skip those or delete them. And so then you would take the top 3 to 5 numbers in that farthest right corner or column, and those are the ones that you would focus on. And you definitely need to have policies and procedures for each one of those hazards. And so when a surveyor comes in and looks at your binder or your program materials, this is going to be one of the first things you want to show them, because this is going to be the foundation for everything else that you show them. So they're going to take a look at this and they'll say, okay, so then let's start with your policies and procedures for earthquake. Is this what you exercised on for your last earthquake? And then you'll go from there. So, Rich, did you have anything else that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, Courtney. So under natural events, or for that matter, man-made events, are they propagated already? That is to say, or do you have those already areas filled out? Or what if I'm just using my modified HVA here, and I put down earthquake, and I don't know. I have a building that's close to the freeway, and so if there is any kind of hazardous material that could spill, now that's not in there necessarily. Are all of these going to be blank, or are they going to be like this and I just choose one?
If that particular hazard doesn't apply to you, you can put a 0, or if you're working with the Excel spreadsheet, you can just delete it out. Okay. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so in other words, you're just going to eliminate all of the ones that don't necessarily, have anything to do with your building.
Right. And if there is a hazard that isn't listed here that does affect your building, you would want to add that in.
Correct. Yeah.
Like you'll see here that elopement is already on there because we've used this one for sniffs quite a bit. But maybe if you are in a Jerry psychiatric ward, then that needs to be something additional. Like, I don't know, Rich, that's your set there, right? So.
Right. Yes. Well, you also see a pandemic rather there, and so I don't believe we would have those types of things here. So you could just eliminate that one as well, obviously.
But Rich, when you were at La Paz, was there a unique risk that you had to factor into your HVA?
Well, first of all, we always plan for earthquake. Secondly, we also were very close to a refinery, and so we chose that one as number 2 because literally a quarter of a mile away, and if something happened, we would have to evacuate. And then after that, I did not know, to be honest with you, to put in man-made events such as elopement or a ligature risk. So I've just learned this recently.
Interesting. Yeah.
Or other things that you could add is like if you've had an active shooter or you had an elopement or any event that you had last year, you could add that as a possible risk factor.
Yeah, and you have terrorism, well, you have chemical, but you have security threat there, so, active shooter or whatever, yeah.
Great, that's very true. That should be on there. We'll have to, I'm going to add that on there before I email it to everyone. But here we have kind of we go a little bit more into detail about the different scores, just in case when you're filling this out by yourself, if you have some questions about how this would apply for that particular hazard. And then again, we have the formula there in red if you are confused about how to fill out the entire chart.
Well, Courtney, one of the things that I did and other buildings are doing is incorporating this as a disaster in-service. So you call your staff together and talk with them about an HVA, what the acronym means, and then solicit their input, because some people will bring up ideas and issues that you had no idea about, and they're very, very good stuff. So, and it also prompts them in regards to this entire disaster process. So for day shift, they might give you some different answers than the night shift. And by the way, the night shift, the 11 to 7 shift, those people are frequently forgotten, unfortunately, and they need to be included as well, because a disaster may occur at 3 in the morning.
That's very true. And the CMS EP rule, it says that you do need to train all of your staff on hire, any contract staff, and while you don't have to test all of your staff in your exercises, you do need to train all of your staff, and you need to provide documentation of those in-services in their personnel files for surveyors to check. So what Rich said is a really great idea. Once you've completed your HVA for your facility, give your staff a little briefing of it, and maybe ask them, do you have any plans for personal preparedness? Because when all of your staff is affected by a disaster too, suddenly you have no staff, and if the roads are shut down, if people have to go evacuate their own families, it becomes very, very difficult to follow, even if you have great policies and procedures for an emergency. That's something that we've seen a lot, and you can never plan enough for something like that. And so something that I would like to start doing with this webinar series is give anyone that's watching some kind of little in-service takeaway for their staff. So I think we should start that today. When you've filled out your HVA, kind of brief your staff on your top hazards, discuss their personal preparedness levels, and then the next webinar, I'll have another in-service ready for any skilled nursing providers that are interested in doing something like that. So if you want to make sure that you hear anything that's going to come out about our training program for in-services, shoot me an email, and we're also going to start doing that in the handouts for this webinar. So, but I don't want to get too far ahead of myself or get off topic here. Just back to our slide. I want to stay within an hour and respect everybody's time here. So completing your HVA with your local DRC, we already talked a little bit about this here. Like Rich said, you don't want to reinvent the wheel. Do this worksheet that we showed you just now for the HVA, but then take that to your DRC and find out, what everyone else's notes say. And that's how you'll get the best plan, because you have the most information that way. Let's see. And
let me emphasize, Courtney, that as different as we are in terms of our HVAs, or our, not HVAs, but our institutions, so the acute care hospitals, the clinics, the dialysis units, many times the HVAs are very similar. So yes, as you've just indicated, bring your HVA to the DRCs. First of all, what the the DRCs are doing is trying to compile, let's say, a HVA according to the DRC, to the Disaster Resource Center. So for instance, one might be at St. Mary's. So for instance, bring your HVAs and add it to the umbrella of other organizations, and just ask questions, because again, we are very similar. We're obviously very different in terms of the types of settings, but we also have one big one, and that's earthquake. That's probably the number one hazard that we're facing in this area of the country.
yes, that's another thing you can never prepare too much for, is an earthquake in LA County, right? So, all right, so I listed all of the HVA meeting dates here one more time. If you haven't been to your DRC before, or you don't know which one you're closest to, check out the map on our webpage. I listed it down there at the bottom. That's just cahfdisasterprep.com/LA County. We're going to be adding more things to that page all the time. So if you want to bookmark it, that's going to be the best place to find information for LA County SNFs and long-term care providers. So I think that's our last slide, Rich. So if you can think.
Well, I would say this, that the DRCs, they start on time, they end on time. They're usually 2 hours. The people there are professionals. They are very interested in seeing people from the skilled nursing facilities come, at least, see what it's all about, ask questions, know who the players are, and participate on some level.
Right. And so our next webinar, it's going to be on March 21st at 2 p.m. It'll be an hour or hour less. And we're going to be talking about memorandums of understanding. So again, check out the sample MOU that's in the handouts for this webinar. And think about some potential partners in your own neighborhood, but also send me an email. That's just ctesterson@cahf.org, or reply to this webinar contact and let me know, kind of give me a breakdown of the different services that your facility offers, because when you transfer a patient during safe evacuation, they have to go to a like facility under the CMS emergency preparedness rule, and that goes back to reimbursement. And it's I don't want to get too much into it now because it's our next webinar. So if you have any questions, go ahead and email me. And
can I mention something?
Yes.
Regarding the HVAs, I reached out to 2 DRCs coordinators regarding what to anticipate, and they were, like you have already mentioned, ideal if you bring your HVAs and to share. But the other thing is, one mentioned is any training that you might need based off of your HVA. You've evaluated your hazards, and now what training do you need to update?
Yeah.
So this is something that they mentioned, so that if you needed to, they can plan training together, or if they're going to project the training to incorporate you in this training. So that's one of those a few things that they wanted to mention, and that you guys all know. One other thing is, if you guys are attending the DRC meeting, email them and let them know that you are attending. I think you mentioned it, but just so that they can make sure that they have a room large enough, and if they can't accommodate everyone, they would let you know and make. I think they're going to really try to make the arrangements for everyone to give them the space.
Yeah, I'm going to set up a list of all of the different meetings on our LA County webpage. So check that out and make sure that you let us know that you're going to attend. That way, yeah, there's a seat for you. And we hope that a lot of people show up, and we just want to make sure that everyone gets a spot. So with that, I think.
Oh, Courtney, let me interject one last thing.
All right.
If people have had their survey by the CMS, by Life Safety, could they contact you, for instance, and let you know, and maybe you could post this, what they asked about, what their expectations were? Did they get any deficiencies? How tough were they? On and on. And the reason I say that is because I haven't heard a lot from facilities in regards to their experience. This morning, there was one fellow at the DRC meeting that I attended. He said that the life safety folks were interested in knowing how they were going to deal with volunteers. Apparently, they thought the program that they had, the HVA, was fine, but they wanted to know about volunteers, which is kind of interesting. So was the survey tough? Was the survey easy? What did they ask?
Rich, that's a good idea, and we have been getting some feedback from people so far. I just want to say, if you do send us anything, we will not post it anywhere. We will keep it, private. And if you just want to give us a call and ask us questions about any of the deficiencies you may have received, that door is always open. And if you, like Rich said, if there is a particular focus on your 2567, if you want to see us do a webinar on something you're really struggling with, that's, shoot me an email and we could talk about doing that as well. So any feedback you want to give us, you can always email me and we can make something happen. Okay?
Thank you.
And thanks, Chris, for hopping on. We always appreciate your time. And everyone stay safe out there. And we're going to post this up on YouTube in about an hour. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.